She was bruised, shivering, and barely conscious, a billionaire no one recognized, lying forgotten in a snow-covered alley. He was just a single dad, passing by on a freezing night, looking for his runaway dog, until he heard her whisper something that stopped him. Cold. What she said changed everything. But what came after the healing, the hidden past, and the love neither of them expected, will stay with you long after the final word. If you believe in second chances and quiet miracles, and in the kind of love that finds you when you're not looking, you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss what happens next in stories that speak to the heart. Now, let me take you back to the night it all began. The snow had been falling since dusk. Thick, relentless, and eerily silent, it blanketed the small Wyoming town like a whispered warning. Most of the houses had their lights dimmed by now, wrapped in the comfort of fireplaces and evening routines. But not the man walking alone through the side streets, his boots crunching through the freshly layered snow, his coat pulled tight, and his breath puffing out in white clouds. Colt Merrick, 39. Father builder and keeper of quiet grief, wasn't out on a stroll. He was searching. "Junie's gonna worry if I don't find that dog," he muttered to himself, voice nearly lost in the wind. "Peanut, come on, boy." His flashlight swept across chain-link fences, trash bins, snow-covered mailboxes. The mutt had dashed off after dinner, nothing unusual, but the sudden drop in temperature made every minute feel heavier. Colt had seen winters swallow smaller things. He turned into a narrow alley between two buildings, old storefronts long abandoned. The snow was deeper here, untouched. The world was muted. Still, until he heard it. Not a bark, not a whimper. A sound softer than the wind. A shuffle. A breath. A voice. Colt froze, senses taut. He raised his flashlight and took slow, deliberate steps forward. And then he saw her. At first he thought it was just a pile of discarded fabric against the brick wall. But the shape was all wrong. It was a woman slumped sideways in the snow, her coat-torn hair soaked in frost. Face pale beneath streaks of dirt, and something darker. Her lips were parted slightly, as if caught mid-plea, though no sound came. He dropped to one knee. "Ma'am," he asked, reaching out cautiously. No response. He leaned closer. She was breathing, but barely. Her fingers were curled inward, stiff as if she'd tried to hold herself together. One hand gripped the collar of her coat like it was all she had left. "Jesus," Colt whispered. He shrugged out of his own heavy jacket and wrapped it around her trembling frame. She didn't flinch. Her skin was ice. Looking around, he saw nothing but snow. No purse. No phone. No footprints, but his. He checked his phone, no signal. Of course. The nearest hospital was nearly a mile away, and his truck was parked 4 blocks back. No way she'd survive waiting. Gritting his teeth, Colt slipped one arm under her knees, the other behind her back. She was light. Too light. As he stood, she stirred. "Don't let them." Colt froze. "Don't let them find me," she whispered, barely audible. "I won't," he said without understanding what it meant. "I've got you." He turned and began to run. The snow fought him with every step. Wind stung his face. His boots slid on icy patches, and twice he nearly went down. The woman in his arms never cried out. Only once as he stumbled did she open her eyes just long enough to meet his, and then close them again. He didn't stop until the warm, buzzing light of the emergency entrance glowed through the white haze ahead. The sliding doors opened, and a nurse gasped at the sight. "Help!" Colt shouted. "She's freezing. I found her in an alley. She's hurt bad." They rushed toward him, wheeling a gurney. As he gently laid her down, a gloved hand touched his arm. "Do you know her name?" the nurse asked. Colt looked down at the woman. Her face was beautiful, even beneath bruises, and cold. There was something noble in the line of her jaw, something broken in the way she curled in on herself. She said, "Serafina, I think." That was all he knew. They took her, vanished into the fluorescent brightness of the hospital, leaving Colt, soaked, shivering, standing still. He didn't even realize his hands were bleeding until he saw crimson dripping onto the snow. That night, Colt returned home to a small cabin tucked just past the edge of town. Junie, his 8-year-old daughter, was waiting on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her like armor. Peanut, the wandering dog, had returned on his own, curled beside her in silent apology. "Dad?" Junie blinked, worried. "I found someone, sweetheart." "Not Peanut." He sighed and sat beside her. "A lady. In the snow. I think we saved her." Junie looked up, her voice small. "She gonna be okay?" "I don't know." She didn't ask more. She reached out and took his hand, small fingers curling into his. For the first time in years, Colt didn't feel like the night had won. He looked at the fireplace, then back at the window, at the endless white beyond it, and thought of the stranger's last words. Don't let them find me. Who was she running from? And why did he already feel like her life was going to change his? The next morning arrived slowly wrapped in the thick hush of snowfall. Outside the window of Colt Merrick's cabin, the landscape had been transformed into something dreamlike, and still blankets of white softening the jagged world. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke, brewed coffee, and something else Colt hadn't felt in a long time: uncertainty. He stood at the kitchen counter in his flannel shirt and thermal sleeves, stirring oatmeal distractedly, as Junie sat at the table, drawing dinosaurs in crayon on old newspaper. Her eyes flicked toward him now, and then curious. "Dad," she finally asked. "What happened to the lady?" Colt exhaled, turning off the stove. "She made it through the night," he said. "They've got her stable at the hospital. But she still doesn't remember much." Junie looked down at her drawing. She looked sad. "Yeah," he said softly. "She did." Colt hadn't slept much. After returning home from the hospital, blood dried on his knuckles, coat left behind. He'd laid awake staring at the ceiling, playing her voice in his mind. "Don't let them find me." There was no ID, no purse, no phone. But she had a name. Serafina. A name like that didn't belong in an alley. And yet there she was. By noon the phone rang. Mr. Merrick said the woman on the other end. "This is Dr. Carver from Memorial." Colt's heart paused. "She's okay. She's alert," the doctor said, still confused. "But she asked if she could speak with you." He didn't hesitate. Junie was already bundling up when he turned to her. "Want to come with me?" She nodded. Maybe she remembers now. They drove through the snowy streets in the old pickup truck heater blowing hot and erratic. The hospital was quiet. Staff thinned from the storm. Colt signed in, took Junie's hand, and followed a nurse to room 214. When the door opened, Serafina was sitting upright in bed, a hospital blanket tucked under her arms. Her face had been cleaned, the bruises less stark beneath her fair skin. Her eyes pale green, and striking, landed on Colt. First, then softened when she saw Junie. "You came back," she whispered. "Of course," Colt said, stepping inside. "I couldn't just leave you in the snow and never check on you." Junie waved shyly. "Hi." Serafina's lips curved slightly. "Hi, sweetheart." A long silence passed, not uncomfortable but tentative. "Do you remember anything?" Colt asked gently. She shook her head. "Only pieces. My name, yes. But the rest is like a jigsaw puzzle missing half the pieces." Her voice quivered, but her tone was calm. "The doctor said the shock, the cold. It can do that." "Do you want us to call someone family?" he asked. Her eyes turned away. "No. Please. Not yet." That same look flashed in her gaze, fear but tightly reined, controlled. Colt recognized it. He'd seen it in the mirror years ago after losing his wife. A person pretending not to be drowning. She began, then stopped. I know this is unusual, but I don't feel safe going back to wherever I was. Not until I know what I'm going back to. You're not ready, Colt said. She nodded. Dr. Carver stepped in, then professional but kind. Ms. Vale is medically stable. With your consent, Mr. Merrick, and if you're willing, we could release her under your temporary supervision, given the circumstances. We're flexible. Colt blinked. You want her to come home with me? Serafina looked down. I know how this sounds, but I promise I won't be a burden. I just need time. A few days. Colt glanced at Junie. The little girl was coloring at the edge of the bed, humming softly. Okay, he said finally. We'll figure it out. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. Serafina kept her hands folded in her lap, wrapped in Junie's old mittens. She wore a borrowed coat from the hospital, oversized army green. Her breath fogged the window as she stared out at the pines flying by. Why'd you say yes? She asked almost to herself. Colt's hands tightened on the wheel. Because I've been alone before. And sometimes, the quiet is too loud. She didn't answer, but her eyes shimmered. That night after dinner, Junie showed Serafina the guest room. It was small, just a twin bed, an old dresser, and a patchwork quilt, but it was warm and safe. I made the bed, Junie said proudly. You're amazing, Serafina whispered, crouching to hug her. When the girl had gone to bed, Colt found Serafina standing by the living room window, watching snow drift through the moonlight. I owe you more than I can say, she murmured. He shook his head. You don't owe me anything. She turned toward him. I was in that alley for a reason. I think I was running from something. Maybe someone. And I'm scared of what I'll remember. I get that, he said. You don't have to explain anything tonight, or tomorrow, just rest. Why are you so kind to me? She asked. Colt hesitated, then said, because I've needed that kind of kindness before, and someone gave it to me when I didn't deserve it. A long breath passed between them. Then, softly, Serafina said, Colt, that night when you carried me, I wasn't sure if I wanted to live, but something about the way you held me, it made me choose to keep breathing. He didn't speak, but for the first time in years, something in his heart cracked, not in pain, but in awe. Because sometimes it wasn't the saving that changed your life. It was being reminded you were worth saving at all. The morning light filtered in through gauzy curtains, painting long golden stripes across the cabin's wooden floor. It was the first clear day since the snowstorm, and for the first time in what felt like years, the world outside Colt Merrick's cabin seemed to exhale. Inside, the warmth of a quiet home filled the air, the crackle of a fire, the scent of cinnamon toast, and the hum of a child softly singing to herself in the next room. Colt stood in the kitchen, stirring a second cup of coffee, not for himself this time. Across the room, Serafina sat, curled on the edge of the couch, her eyes fixed on the snow-covered treetops outside. The oversized hospital coat had been traded for one of Colt's flannel sleeves rolled at the wrists. She looked less like a stranger today, and more like someone trying to belong, even if she didn't know how. Junie emerged from her bedroom with purpose, clutching a small sketchbook and a fistful of markers. Serafina, she called, excited. I made you something. Serafina turned, surprised. You did. Junie climbed up beside her, flipping to a page filled with wobbly but heartfelt drawings, stick figures in a snowy forest, a little dog with floppy ears, and 3 people holding hands under a sun that smiled too hard. Serafina studied the page. Is this us? Junie nodded. That's me. That's Dad. And that's you. She pointed. I wasn't sure if you had a dog, so I gave you Peanut, too. Serafina smiled gently. I don't know if I have a dog. but I think I'd like Peanut. You can share him with me." Colt, watching from the kitchen, felt something settle in his chest. There was no grand revelation in this moment, just the ordinary magic of kindness being returned quiet and without asking. Later that morning, while Junie was building a snow fort outside, Serafina stood at the window watching her. "She's remarkable," she said softly. "She gets that from her mom," Colt replied, not looking up from the dishes. Serafina glanced at him. "You don't talk about her." "Not much to say, that doesn't ache," he said simply. "Anna was sunlight, bright, effortless. She passed when Junie was 5. Cancer. Fast." "I'm sorry," Serafina said. She hesitated, then added, "You've raised a good kid." Colt dried his hands. "I've tried. Some days it feels like I'm patching a roof with a fishing net, but we stay dry enough." She smiled at the metaphor. "And the sketchbook? Oh, that's her therapy. She doesn't talk about missing her mom, not directly. But if you look at her drawings, Anna shows up in the corners sometimes. Hair like fire. Playing the piano." Serafina turned, surprised. "Anna played professionally before Junie was born. Music was the first thing I ever saw bring stillness to a room." There was a pause. Then Serafina spoke. "I played too. I think. I remember. Keys. Not faces. Not places. But the feel of them. The sound of ivory beneath my hands." Colt watched her carefully. "Maybe that's a start." She nodded. "Maybe." That afternoon, Junie pulled Serafina into a world only children could build. Snow Angel's cocoa with too many marshmallows, and a game where you couldn't touch the floor because it was lava made of broccoli. Colt watched them from the porch, sipping coffee boots on the rail, and a quiet question blooming inside him. How does a woman like that end up in an alley alone, afraid and half frozen? Later, when Junie had gone down for a nap, Serafina returned to the living room and sat beside the fire. She was holding Junie's sketchbook. "She made me a new page," she said, showing it to Colt. This time the figures had names. Junie, Dad, Sarah, Peanut. And in the sky, a simple word, written in crayon stars. Safe. "She's starting to trust you," Colt said. "She shouldn't," Serafina whispered more to herself. Why not? Serafina looked into the flames. "Because I don't know what I've done, or who I was running from, and part of me is scared that when I remember, I won't like the woman I used to be." Colt leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Do you think she's gone?" "That version of you," Serafina hesitated. "I think I left her behind in that alley. Then maybe that's not the worst thing." She turned to him, eyes rimmed with quiet tears. "Colt, what if I was cruel or selfish? What if I had money and power and wasted it all?" Colt looked at her, not blinking. "Then maybe this is your second chance, and maybe the only person who gets to decide who you are now is you." She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly, as if unsure she had the right. Serafina reached out and placed her hand over his. It was the simplest gesture. And yet for Colt, who hadn't held a woman's hand in nearly 5 years, it felt like the sound of something soft cracking open. Like a cabin window, stuck all winter suddenly giving way to the spring air. That night, while the wind returned and the world beyond the cabin howled in distant echoes, Junie slept with her sketchbook under her pillow. Serafina watched over her for a while, then tiptoed back into the living room, where Colt sat by the fire with a book unread in his lap. She stood silently for a moment, then said, "I'd like to try playing again. Anna's piano's in the shed. I haven't touched it since she passed." "Would you bring it in when you're ready?" Colt nodded. "I think," Serafina said quietly. "I need to hear what I still remember." The piano arrived on a Saturday, wheeled in on an old dolly that squeaked with every turn. Colt had kept it in the shed, covered with 2 tarps and a layer of dust that settled like grief over time. It had belonged to Anna, his late wife, and Colt hadn't so much as uncovered it since her funeral. Now, as the old upright rolled through the cabin doorway, the air seemed to shift. Even Junie, normally excited by anything, out of routine, stood still beside the couch, crayon in hand, silent. "Can I clean it?" she asked. Colt nodded, carefully. Junie wiped the keys with a cloth, while Serafina hovered nearby, as if standing too close might shatter something sacred. She hadn't asked for much since arriving, but this had clearly meant something. Her hand stayed folded in front of her fingers, twining nervously, eyes locked on the instrument, like it might breathe. When Junie was done, Serafina approached the piano slowly. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and for a moment, nothing. Then one note, middle C, soft, uncertain. Another followed, then two more. Her hands searched gently like they were trying to remember a language once native to them. And then, without warning, a melody emerged. Simple, barely formed, but haunting. Colt listened from the kitchen dish towel forgotten in his hands. He didn't recognize the tune, but it wrapped around the room like smoke. Even Peanut, curled in his usual corner, lifted his head. Junie leaned close. "What song is that?" "I don't know," Serafina whispered. "But my hands do." The snow melted slowly over the next few days. By midweek, the roads were mostly clear, and life in the town began stirring again. Colt returned to short construction jobs, and Serafina stayed home with Junie, helping her with homeschooling and practicing the piano each afternoon. But on Thursday morning, everything shifted. Colt had just finished setting a window frame for a neighbor when his phone buzzed. A text from Kyle Rivers, an old friend who now worked security for a local state senator. "Dude, is this the woman staying with you? Check the news. Vail Foundation. Front page." Colt wiped his hands on his jeans, heart sinking. He opened the link, and there she was. Serafina Vail, hair slicked back in a formal headshot, same sharp eyes, same porcelain skin. Below the image, the headline read, "Missing Vail, IRS presumed dead $1 billion legacy in limbo." Colt stared unmoving. The article detailed how Serafina Vail, sole heir to the Vail Foundation, one of the largest philanthropic trusts in the Northwest, had vanished 2 weeks ago from a gala in Jackson Hole. Her disappearance had sparked speculation of foul play, a media frenzy, and now escalating rumors of a corporate coup within the foundation's leadership. He dropped his phone onto the truck seat. Everything inside him tightened, not from anger, but from a sudden storm of questions. When he returned to the cabin that afternoon, Junie was on the floor, building a Lego castle hospital with Peanut at her feet. The piano was silent. Serafina stood in the kitchen drying dishes. When she turned and saw Colt, something in her posture changed. She knew. "I saw it," Colt said. She nodded. "I figured you would. You lied to me." "I never lied," she said, setting the towel down. "I just didn't tell." Colt's jaw flexed. "You're Serafina Vail, the billionaire." She flinched at the word like it was a slur. "Was." He stepped back. "You disappeared. People think you're dead. The police are looking for you. Why are you here in my home hiding?" Serafina looked down at her hands, because the truth wasn't safe. Colt didn't reply. She spoke slowly. "That night, I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't chased. I walked into that alley because I didn't want to be found. My life, everything in it had become performance. A family name, a trust fund, a board of directors who valued image over integrity, and a man I was supposed to marry not out of love, but for mergers." Her voice cracked. I snapped. Quietly. I left the gala changed into jeans in the hotel bathroom, walked until my feet bled. I found a liquor store, a coat from a thrift bin, and tried to vanish into the dark. But it didn't matter, someone still recognized me. There was a man. He cornered me, took my bag. I think he meant to do more. But I ran. I slipped. And the snow, it swallowed me. She paused, tears welling. And then, you. Colt's expression softened. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know who I was anymore. Not until this place, this cabin. Your daughter. That piano. I didn't want to go back to being Serafina Vale. He sighed. That's not something you get to decide, Serafina. There are people out there I know. I'll leave. Tomorrow. He stepped forward. That's not what I meant. She looked at him surprised. I meant, you need to decide who you're going to be now, not just who you were. There was a long silence. Then Junie's voice floated in from the other room. Daddy, is Sarah in trouble? Colt turned toward the hallway. No, honey. She just remembered something important. That night, Serafina sat at the piano again. Her fingers moved slower this time, not from fear, but thought. The melody she played wasn't familiar. It was hers. New. Unwritten. Colt sat beside her quietly. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, she said. Neither do I. But I know this, she added. If you hadn't found me that night, I wouldn't be here. Not just alive, but here. Colt placed his hand over hers on the keys. You were never lost, he said gently. You were just waiting to be heard. The fire had burned low in the hearth, crackling softly like the heartbeat of a house that had witnessed too many quiet goodbyes. Outside, the wind swept through the pines, moaning low and steady, carrying with it the cold bite of a Wyoming night. But inside Colt Merrick's cabin, the chill didn't come from the weather. It came from the unspoken. Serafina sat cross-legged on the couch, staring into the embers, as if they might offer answers to questions she hadn't dared form yet. Her fingers clutched the hem of Junie's old quilt bundled in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since Colt found out the truth. Across the room, Colt leaned against the doorframe to the kitchen, arms crossed. He'd made coffee and poured 2 cups, but hers sat untouched. Junie was already asleep in the back room, her sketchbook tucked under her pillow, her world untouched by the storm slowly forming between the 2 adults who had become her universe. You don't have to say anything, Serafina murmured, breaking the silence. Colt exhaled. Maybe I do. She looked over her shoulder at him, waiting. He moved to the armchair, sat slowly. You said you were running. That night. In the alley. Serafina turned her gaze back to the fire. I wasn't just running from them, Colt. I was running from me. Colt didn't interrupt. The stillness of his posture was his answer. She went on, voice trembling. My life was polished, curated. Everything I did was meant to serve the brand, the legacy. I thought if I donated enough, smiled enough, acted gracious enough, it would make up for how hollow I felt, how often I walked into rooms filled with people and felt like I wasn't allowed to leave. She swallowed hard. That night, something inside me gave out. I wasn't in danger at first. I chose to disappear. And then, when I saw the alley, the snow, the quiet, it felt like permission. Colt's voice was low. Permission for what Serafina's lips trembled. To stop pretending. To stop carrying the weight of a life that didn't belong to me anymore. She drew a breath that caught halfway through. I wasn't just lost, Colt. I was finished. A long silence filled the room. The logs shifted in the fire. Then Colt leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You weren't finished. You were breaking. There's a difference. Serafina looked at him. I've broken too, he continued. After Anna died, I'd get in the truck at night and just drive. Nowhere. Sometimes I wouldn't even remember turning around. I'd pull over, look at the empty seat beside me and think, if I just closed my eyes, maybe the world would stop spinning. Her expression softened, stricken. What stopped you? He looked up, eyes glassy but steady. Junie. One night she asked me why the moon followed us. I couldn't answer. I just cried. Because she wasn't asking about the moon. She was asking if I'd leave her too. Serafina wiped a tear with the corner of the quilt. She was 5, he whispered. And somehow, she saved me. Serafina's voice came out in a breath. And now you've saved me. Colt stood and crossed the space between them, kneeling in front of her. No, he said gently. You chose to live. You let yourself be found. That's something I couldn't do back then. She reached up slowly, fingers brushing against his cheek. I didn't let myself be found, until I felt safe. And now, he asked. I'm still afraid, she whispered. But it's different. Before, I was afraid of being seen. Now, I'm afraid of what comes after being seen. He nodded slowly. That's what healing feels like. Terrifying but real. Her eyes welled again. What if I don't deserve to heal? What if I hurt people I don't even remember? Colt took her hand in both of his. Then you ask for forgiveness. And you do better. That's all any of us get. She stared at him, and in that moment, surrounded by flickering shadows and the soft hush of wind, the space between them seemed to hum with something unspoken. Then softly, she said, Would you stay with me? Just for a little while. Colt didn't answer with words. He simply sat beside her, pulled the quilt over both of them, and let the silence do what words couldn't. An hour later, after Serafina had drifted to sleep with her head on his shoulder, Colt gently tucked the quilt around her and stepped outside. The night air bit at his skin, but he welcomed it. It kept him grounded. He pulled out his phone. Kyle Rivers had texted again. Still no press release. But some board members think she's alive. Talk of hiring private security to dig deeper. Colt stared at the screen. Then, after a moment, he typed back, She's safe, for now. That's all I can say. You're sure she wants to stay hidden? He paused, then replied, She doesn't know yet what she wants, but she's starting to remember why she wants it. He slid the phone into his pocket, looked up at the stars breaking through the clouds, and whispered into the stillness, not to the sky, but to the woman sleeping on his couch, Don't run anymore. You're not alone in this. The morning after Serafina fell asleep against him by the fire, Colt rose before the sun. He was used to early mornings. The silence before the day began was where he sorted the world, when memories were less sharp and ghosts still slept. He moved quietly through the kitchen, boiling water for coffee, his boots muffled on the wooden floor. Outside, the snow had settled into a soft crust. The pines stood tall and frozen. It was one of those rare winter mornings when the cold felt peaceful instead of punishing. By the time he heard soft footsteps behind him, the kettle was whistling. Did I sleep here all night? Serafina asked groggily, rubbing her eyes with the sleeve of her borrowed flannel. Colt poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. You did. Your neck's probably mad at you. She smiled faintly. Not nearly as mad as I thought it would be. He handed her a mug. It's not fancy, but it's hot. She took a sip, exhaled. I forgot how good a real morning could feel. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need filling. Then Serafina glanced at him. You mentioned something last night. About Junie. Saving you. Colt nodded, leaning back against the counter. Yeah, she looked hesitant. Can I ask, what happened? To her mother. He didn't respond right away. His eyes went to the window where Junie's tiny snowman still stood leaning slightly to one side. Anna and I met in college, he said slowly. She was a music major. I was construction science, all calluses and flannel even back then. Serafina smiled gently. She used to say, I walked like a man twice my age, like the world owed me something. He chuckled under his breath. She was sunshine in a thunderstorm, laughed too loud. cried at the drop of a hat. She could play a piano like it was breathing through her. He paused. We married young. Bought this cabin with every cent we had. It was a mess, then leaky roof pipes that sang in the walls. But we fixed it, together. Serafina waited. She got sick 2 weeks after Junie turned 5, he said. Finally. Pancreatic, fast, unforgiving, a long breath. She was gone in 4 months. Serafina's hand tightened around her mug. I didn't handle it well, Colt admitted. I held it together for Junie. Made breakfast, brushed her hair, read bedtime stories. But inside, I was drywall, all cracked and waiting to fall apart. He looked at her now, eyes open, but shadowed. One night I forgot to pick Junie up from her friend's house, just forgot. It was snowing. She walked home 2 miles in boots that didn't fit anymore, came through that front door, with tears frozen on her cheeks, and instead of yelling, she just said, Daddy, if you're too sad to remember me, I'll remember us for both of us. Serafina covered her mouth. She was 5, he said softly. And I knew then I could break, but I wasn't allowed to stay broken. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Serafina stepped forward and placed her hand over his, resting on the counter. You did more than survive, she said. You made a home. I made a bunker, he corrected gently. A place no one could enter. Until a woman with frostbite and no memory crashed into it. She smiled through misted eyes. Sorry about that. I'm not, he said. Later that afternoon, Serafina sat with Junie at the kitchen table. They were painting wooden ornaments from a kit Junie had found in the hall closet. The girl had insisted they make Christmas in March, since Serafina had missed it. Does your dad always drink that much coffee? Junie asked, suddenly dipping her brush into blue paint. Serafina chuckled. Yes. I think it's how he stays quiet so long without exploding. Junie leaned in close, whispering. He used to talk more. Before Mama went away. Serafina's heart squeezed. I'm glad he talks to me. Junie nodded, her voice small. I think he likes you, but he gets scared when he likes people. Serafina blinked. He told you that, no? But I know. He got scared when Peanut ran into the street. Same face. Serafina looked at the child, too wise, too aware, and realized this home wasn't just Colt's sanctuary. It was Junie's, too. And if she ever left, it wouldn't just be Colt she'd leave behind. Can I tell you a secret? Serafina whispered. Junie leaned closer. You can tell me anything. I'm scared, too, Serafina said, but not of him. I'm scared I'll remember something that makes me leave. Junie didn't answer right away. Then she picked up a tiny ornament shaped like a star and held it out. Then take this one. It can remind you that you don't have to go back to where you were. Serafina took the star in her palm. That might be the bravest thing anyone's ever said to me. That evening, Colt found Serafina out on the porch, the small wooden star hanging from the edge of the railing, catching the light of the setting sun. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just breathing. Remember anything today? No, she said. But I remembered why I want to remember. Colt stepped beside her. And why's that? Because I want to choose what comes next, not run from what came before. He looked at her profile, the wind brushing strands of hair from her face. You know, he said, for someone who started off lost. You're getting pretty good at finding your way. She looked at him, then eyes soft. I have good company. And for the first time, the space between their words didn't feel tentative. It felt like the beginning of something they'd both spent too long believing they didn't deserve. The wind carried the scent of thawing earth, pine needles, and a hint of something new, something like the edge of spring. For the first time in weeks, the snow was beginning to recede in Colt Merrick's yard. Not in grand gestures, but in the little things, the gravel peeking through the driveway, the dripping eaves, and the way Junie no longer zipped her coat all the way to her chin. Inside the cabin, things were changing too. Serafina now moved with a kind of quiet confidence. She brewed her own coffee, swept the porch, fed Peanut, and played the piano not just for herself, but for the house. Each note was an offering part, memory, part, hope. Her hands had regained familiarity, even if her past hadn't. But one morning after breakfast, she did something unexpected. She asked for a box, Colt repeated, buttering toast at the counter. Wooden if you have it. Small, just big enough to hold a few things. Colt gave her a look. You burying secrets? Serafina smiled. Sort of. She didn't say more. Just spent the morning gathering objects, a hospital bracelet she'd kept in a drawer, the thrift store scarf she'd been wearing the night Colt found her, and the note Junie had written her on day 2, a stick figure drawing with the words, "You're safe here," scribbled in pink marker. By late afternoon, she'd tucked them all inside the box and stepped outside into the half-melted yard. Junie followed, her coat flapping open. "What are you doing?" "Something that might help," Serafina said. Colt stood on the porch watching as Serafina knelt beside the big fir tree near the edge of the fence. She dug gently, slowly, with bare hands in the softening earth. Not too deep. Just enough. When the hole was ready, she placed the box inside. Then she took a deep breath, pulled a silver pendant from around her neck, a simple chain with a charm shaped like a key, and dropped it into the box before covering it with soil. No words. No ceremony. Just earth closure and the exhale of a woman making peace with what could not be fully known. That night, after Junie had fallen asleep early from all the outdoor excitement, Colt brought 2 mugs of tea to the living room and found Serafina staring at the fire. He handed her a cup, then sat. "I didn't ask earlier," he said. "About the box." She held the warm mug in both hands. "I needed to let go of something, even if I didn't know exactly what it was." "You remembered something?" "Not clearly. Just flashes." Her voice lowered. A man yelling in a hallway, a flashbulb camera, champagne, applause that didn't feel like praise, someone tugging my arm, the sound of piano keys when I didn't want to play. Colt watched her carefully. All that came back today. Just came closer. They sat in silence, the fire whispering its soft language. After a while, Serafina looked at him. "Do you think people can change even if they forget who they were?" "Yes," Colt said without hesitation. "Why?" "Because I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago, and I remember everything." She blinked, eyes softening. "I think Colt said change doesn't start with forgetting. It starts with deciding." Serafina looked down. "That box. It wasn't just about what I let go. It was also about what I want to carry forward." "And what's that?" She hesitated, then said, This life. You. Junie. Music. Breathing without feeling like I'm performing for a world that never asked who I really was." Colt looked at her, like he had never looked at anyone else. "Not since Anna. Maybe not even then." "You're not performing," he said. "Not here." The next day, Colt returned from a short job in town to find a surprise waiting for him. Junie had convinced Serafina to bake, and not just cookies, a full pie. The cabin smelled of sugar cinnamon, and something almost foreign to Colt's memory home. "Don't laugh," Serafina warned, wiping flour from her face as he walked in. "It's structurally unsound." Colt looked at the lopsided crust and grinned. "That's exactly how I like them." They all ate on the porch steps, the air still brisk but tolerable. Junie told knock-knock jokes with punchlines that made no sense, and got flour on Peanut's nose. The pie was too sweet, too soft in the middle, and perfect. Afterward, Serafina stood brushing crumbs from her jeans and pointed to the tree where she'd buried the box. "I want to show you something," she said to Colt. He followed her. She knelt beside the spot now covered with fresh pine needles. Then, in the snow just beyond it, she used her finger to draw something her name. Not Vale, just Serafina. She looked at him. "I think I want to be just this now." He crouched beside her. "Then that's exactly who you are." Their eyes met. No kiss, no grand gesture. But the warmth in that gaze said more than any touch could. She wasn't just healing. She was choosing to live. Time slipped forward the way it always does, in places too quiet to notice. Not with ticking clocks or loud announcements, but with subtle signs, melting snowbanks, longer afternoons, the reappearance of mud along the gravel road that led to the Merrick cabin. Spring was arriving. Not suddenly. Just honestly. Inside the cabin, life settled into a rhythm, the kind that doesn't look like a miracle until you've lived without one. Colt returned to working part-time with a local builder who didn't ask many questions. He left at dawn, came home before dinner, always greeted at the door by Peanut's bark and Junie's steady chatter about whatever she was reading, drawing, or imagining that day. And Serafina stayed. Not out of necessity or fear or even confusion anymore. She stayed because it felt right. She played piano most mornings now. Not always full songs, sometimes just scales, or invented melodies that only existed for that moment. Junie often curled up beside her with a sketchbook, drawing what the music felt like instead of what it looked like. Colt would often pause outside the door when he got home just to listen for a second. It was the kind of sound that made you believe people could come back from anything. One evening after dinner, Junie was brushing Peanut's fur with a pink plastic brush, while Serafina and Colt sat on the porch. The sky was streaked with lavender and amber. A soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and the last of the melting snow. "I wrote a letter," Serafina said quietly, breaking the peaceful silence. Colt looked over at her. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper creased at the corners. "Actually, I've written several." To who, he asked. "To myself," she said. "To the woman I used to be." She opened the page, then hesitated. "Can I read it to you?" He nodded. Serafina's voice was soft but clear. "Dear Serafina Vale, you did your best with what you had. But somewhere along the way you stopped asking what you needed. You let the noise define your worth, the cameras define your smile, and the people who wanted pieces of you define your path. But I know, now you weren't weak. You were tired. You weren't selfish. You were scared. I forgive you. And I hope wherever you are now in memory or in shadow, you know that I've found something real. A little cabin in Wyoming. A girl who makes stars out of crayons. A man who taught me that kindness doesn't ask for history. It offers a future. I'm not you anymore. And that's okay." With compassion, Serafina Colt sat still, absorbing the silence that followed. "That's beautiful," he said finally. "It felt like something I needed to say," she replied, folding the letter again. "Are you going to keep it?" She shook her head. "I think I'll let it go." She stood, walked to the edge of the porch, and lifted the letter into the breeze. The wind caught it, pulled it upward, like a bird released from hand. It drifted, spun, and was gone over the trees, out of sight. "That part of me can rest now," she said. Colt watched her, admiring not just her grace, but the quiet strength she no longer tried to hide. Later that week, Serafina received a letter that wasn't from herself. It came in a plain envelope postmarked from Jackson Hole. No return address. Inside was a short note, written in precise, careful penmanship. "Ms. Vale, if you're reading this, I hope you're safe. There's been no official press release about your disappearance. The foundation board is stalled. The vultures are waiting. I've said nothing. I will continue to say nothing. But if you ever wish to return and reclaim what was yours, I'll be waiting. K.R. She stared at the initials, K.R. Kyle Rivers, her former chief of staff. Loyal, quiet, trustworthy. She showed the letter to Colt later that night. What does it mean, he asked. It means they haven't found me, and that Kyle is protecting me silently. Does it make you want to go back? Serafina looked at him. Then at the fire crackling low in the stone hearth. No, she said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He nodded. That's okay? She smiled, grateful. He didn't push, didn't analyze, didn't weigh her answer against anything but her well-being. Colt Merrick had many scars, but none had made him sharp. They had made him steady. Spring moved on. Wildflowers began breaking through the thawed soil. The days grew longer. And Serafina began writing again, not letters this time, but music. Pieces that reflected something between memory and invention. She had no formal manuscripts, just a lined journal and a pencil, and the quiet belief that what she wrote mattered even if no one else ever saw it. One afternoon, Junie peeked over her shoulder. "What's that one called?" she asked. Serafina paused, then smiled. "The House That Remembered Me." Junie tilted her head. "I thought you forgot who you were." "I did," Serafina said. "But this house reminded me." Junie nodded like it made perfect sense, then ran off to draw a picture of it: the cabin, the piano, the porch, with flower pots still empty, and 3 stick figures standing out front, holding hands under a banner that read, "We're not lost anymore." It was the kind of spring afternoon that looked like a memory, even while you were living it. The pines swayed gently. The sky had turned soft with light, as if the world had stepped a few inches closer to heaven. A breeze carried the scent of turned soil and sun-warmed pine cones, and somewhere beyond the woods, a bird repeated the same hopeful note, like a quiet question. Colt Merrick had just finished repairing the back fence when he heard the crunch of gravel. He straightened slowly, squinting toward the road. A vehicle, sleek, unfamiliar dust, kissed but clearly expensive, rolled to a stop in front of the cabin. It idled for a moment, then the door opened, and Serafina stepped out. But not the Serafina who had collapsed into his arms, half frozen on a winter night. This was a woman fully awake. Her hair was shorter now, brushed clean to her shoulders caught by the breeze. She wore jeans and boots and a soft gray cardigan. In her hand she held something wrapped in brown paper. Colt froze. The hammer in his grip went still. She walked toward him with a smile that wasn't shy or uncertain anymore. It was grounded, quiet, and real. "I left too long," she said, stopping a few feet away. "I didn't know if you were coming back," he replied. "I wasn't sure either," she said. "But then I heard a song in my head, and it ended here." He didn't move, not because he was angry, but because everything inside him was bracing for the ache of letting his guard down again. She noticed. "I'm not here to take up space you didn't save for me," she added gently. "I'm here because I realized I don't want to spend my life performing. I want to live somewhere I don't have to be anyone but who I've become." Colt's voice came out rough. "You know who that is, now I do." She held up the wrapped object and handed it to him. He peeled back the paper. It was a framed drawing, Junie's drawing. The one with the 3 of them outside the cabin under the words, "We're not lost anymore." Serafina smiled. "She gave it to me the morning I left. I had it pressed and framed at a little shop on the way to Jackson. It reminded me where I actually started." Colt stared at the image, then lifted his eyes to hers. "You look different." "I feel different," she said. "I had lunch with Kyle. We talked about the foundation. I could go back. Probably. Legally, nothing stops me. But that chapter's over. He nodded. You don't want it? I want to give again. Just differently. She stepped closer. Not from a penthouse or behind a boardroom table. I want to teach kids who can't afford lessons. Start a small music program out here maybe. Live in the real world again. The world that saved me. Colt stared at her, and for the first time in years, he let himself hope. I kept your spot on the porch, he said. Voice barely above a whisper. She smiled. I was hoping you would. Later that evening, Serafina stood in the doorway of Junie's room. The girl had just woken from a nap, rubbing her eyes, and blinking in disbelief when she saw Serafina's silhouette. You came back, Junie whispered, as if scared it was a dream. Serafina stepped forward and sat beside her. I never wanted to be gone, but I had to find out if the person you met here was real. And are you? I think I'm more me now than I've ever been. Junie smiled and hugged her fiercely. I missed you the same amount every day. Serafina buried her face in the girl's hair and whispered, Then that's exactly how much I needed to come back. That night, Colt and Serafina sat on the porch with 2 mugs of tea and 1 quilt shared between them. The moon hung low, casting light across the trees in silver threads. I never thought I'd feel this again, Serafina said, voice soft. Not peace. Not like this. Colt looked at her. What do you feel? Safe, she said. Not just in the house. In the pause. In the moment where nothing has to be earned. Just lived. Colt was quiet for a long time. Then he turned, reaching into his flannel shirt pocket. I want to show you something, he said. He pulled out a piece of wood no larger than a coin. Carved into it with the precision of a builder's hand was the shape of a heart, not stylized, but real, anatomical, human. This, he said, was from the day I rebuilt the piano bench. I sanded the corner too far and carved this instead of tossing the whole thing. It reminded me that broken things can still hold. She touched it carefully. May I keep it? He nodded. It's not perfect. Neither am I. They sat like that for a while, 2 people who had every reason not to trust again doing exactly that. In the silence, Colt finally whispered, Are you staying? Serafina looked out at the trees, then at the stars, then at him. I already did, she said. And for once the wind didn't howl or moan. It simply carried their stillness into the dark, like a vow it meant to keep. The rhythm of life at the cabin didn't change all at once when Serafina returned. It shifted the way a river bends over time, not abruptly, but inevitably. There were no dramatic speeches, no confessions shouted into the wind. Instead, there were coffee cups, placed side by side in the morning, dishes, washed shoulder to shoulder in the evening, and music, always music, drifting from the living room, like a new language they were learning together. By the second week, Serafina had moved her things from the guest room into the main bedroom with Colt. Not because anyone asked, because it made sense. Colt, for his part, hadn't said the words, I love you not yet. But he brought her wildflowers from the edge of the property and fixed the squeaky floorboard in the hallway she always stepped on. He tuned the piano sanded down the old music bench and built a small wooden shelf for her journals next to the window. He was a man who loved not in declarations, but in details, and Serafina saw everyone. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, Serafina stood in the kitchen beside Junie, both of them elbow-deep in cookie dough. Peanut paste nearby, aware that treats were involved, and determined not to miss the opportunity. You think your dad will like these? Serafina asked, licking a bit of dough off her finger. Junie grinned. He'll act like he's judging them, but he'll eat 5 before dinner. They shared a laugh, the kind that builds a room inside a room. Serafina wiped her hands and glanced at the corkboard pinned on the far wall. Drawings, photos, newspaper clippings, including the one from Jackson Hole she had finally allowed Colt to pin there folded, so only the headline was visible. Vale heiress missing. Silence raises new questions. Beneath it was a photo Junie had taken with a disposable camera. 3 figures Colt with a coffee mug. Serafina laughing mid-blink. Junie grinning like someone who knew more than she said. Behind them, the cabin. Under it, Junie had written in pink crayon, "Our family." Now, Serafina stared at the photo for a long moment. "Do you think it's weird?" she asked Junie softly. "That I don't want to go back," Junie shrugged. "I think you came back to the right place. That's the only kind of back that matters." Serafina reached out and gently kissed the girl's forehead. Colt walked in just then, catching the scene, the scent of cookies, the sound of music playing low on the radio, and the 2 people he hadn't known he'd been waiting for. That weekend, the cabin saw something it hadn't in years. Laughter from strangers. Serafina's idea, an open mic afternoon for local kids, hosted from the porch with a borrowed keyboard and mismatched lawn chairs. She'd put up flyers at the general store and the school library. Music and cocoa, bring your own song. They didn't expect much. But people came. 6 kids performed. 1 brought a harmonica. Another recited a poem about tractors and friendship. Junie played a duet with Serafina, awkward but joyful. The last girl, shy and no older than 10, stood behind the microphone, holding a guitar too big for her arms. She strummed 3 wrong chords, then started to cry. Serafina stepped forward, sat on the edge of the porch, and simply said, "What if you just hum it, sweetheart? I'll play with you." And they did. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was beautiful. Colt stood behind the porch, rail arms, crossed eyes soft. He watched Serafina not as a guest anymore, not even as a surprise, but as someone who belonged. Someone who had come home. That night, as the last cars pulled away and the lanterns were extinguished, Serafina and Colt sat on the porch, swing legs lightly brushing a blanket over their laps. The stars were brighter than usual, or maybe they just finally noticed them. "I used to think I had to earn everything I had," Serafina whispered. "Even love, especially love." Colt didn't look at her when he answered. "You don't earn love. You return it. You build it. You carry it when it's too heavy for someone else." Serafina looked at him, then really looked, and asked, without hesitation, "Do you love me?" Colt turned, eyes steady. "Yes," he said. "Since the day you played a song you didn't know you remembered." She leaned into him, pressing her head against his shoulder. "And you?" he asked. "I think I loved you the moment you said I wasn't broken. Just changing shape." He took her hand in his. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. The next morning, Junie ran into the living room with something in her hand, a hand-drawn poster. At the top, in giant crayon letters, the Serafina School of Music and Kindness. Underneath, opening soon. Sign up on the porch. Donations in cookies or compliments. Colt read it aloud, then looked at Serafina. "You're really going to do it," she smiled. "Only if you'll build the benches." "I'll build the benches if you promise to keep the name." Junie jumped between them. "And I'll be your first student." "But I already know everything about kindness, so mostly just music." They laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't echo, because it doesn't need to. It stays in the room, in the walls, in the hearts of the people who know they've finally built something that will hold. A year passed, the way all good years do, not in milestones, but in moments. There were no headlines, no grand ceremonies, just slow days and sacred rituals. Sunday pancakes slightly burnt around the edges, piano lessons under late summer light fences, mended and stories retold. Life unfolded not with thunder, but with grace. And Serafina Vale, once a headline, once a mystery, became at last A woman named simply Serafina. A music teacher. A listener. A builder of small lives, and one great love. Her past, once so loud, had quieted. The foundation never released a statement. A new board took shape without scandal. Kyle Rivers sent a Christmas card with no return address. And Serafina kept the unopened envelope in a drawer, not to forget, but to remember what she no longer owed. On the first true spring morning of their second year together, the cabin was filled with something almost holy. Sunlight spilled through the windows. The kitchen smelled of lemon and cedar. And Colt Merrick, now grayer at the temples, softer at the edges, stood barefoot in the hallway, watching the two girls he loved more than air itself. Junie sat at the piano, playing a halting version of Clair de Lune. Beside her, Serafina followed along in the old music book, with a pencil tucked behind her ear. "You're getting closer," Serafina said, tapping the page. Junie groaned dramatically. "I'm getting worse. My fingers hate me." "Your fingers are tired. That's different." Colt leaned against the doorframe. "Should I bring in a mediator?" Serafina turned and smiled. "Only if he's as charming as he is tall. I make no promises." He stepped into the room and ruffled Junie's hair. She batted him away with the exaggerated sigh of an almost 10-year-old. "Can I take a break?" she asked. "You earned it," Serafina replied. 15 minutes. Junie dashed outside with Peanut on her heels, leaving the front door swinging slightly in the breeze. Serafina looked after her for a moment, then closed the music book and turned to Colt. "She's growing fast. They all do," he said, "especially when you want them to stay small." Serafina rose and crossed the room to where he stood. She folded into his arms, like a secret coming home. "I've been thinking," she said. "Dangerous," he murmured into her hair. She smiled against his shoulder. "About how this all began." He pulled back slightly, his brow furrowing. "You mean the alley," she said softly. "The fire. The way you held me when I was too cold to speak. The way you stayed." He didn't answer, not right away, because Colt Merrick didn't need to speak to be understood. His hand moved to his pocket and pulled out a small box. Serafina blinked. "What's that?" He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, beautiful, with a delicate vine motif etched around the band. Not flashy, not expensive, but chosen with hands that had built homes and buried grief. "I don't need a wedding," he said. "I don't need papers. I don't need flowers or speeches or witnesses." Her breath caught. "But I need you," he continued. "Every day. In every version of this life. And if you'll have me, not because you were rescued, but because you stayed, I'd like to give you a place that doesn't just feel like home. That is one." Serafina reached up, tears already slipping down her cheeks, and cupped his face. "You already have me," she whispered. "But I'll wear it proudly." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had always been waiting there. That evening, Serafina sat on the porch steps with Junie curled beside her, both of them wrapped in a shared quilt. Colt stood nearby, tuning the strings of Junie's toy guitar, pretending it needed far more fixing than it did. The wind was soft. The stars were early. "Do you think people ever stop needing second chances?" Junie asked suddenly out of nowhere, as children sometimes do when their hearts grow faster than their age. Serafina considered. "No," she said gently. "But sometimes the second chance doesn't come from the world. It comes from you deciding to give yourself one." Junie looked up. "Like you did. Exactly like I did." They sat that way for a long time, and when the first fireflies of the season blinked to life along the edge of the tree line, Serafina smiled and whispered into the wind. "I remember her now, the woman I was." Colt stepped closer, catching only the last part. "Do you miss her?" "No," she said, "but I'm thankful she broke. so I could become someone worth staying for. He sat beside her, and together with Junie nestled between them and Peanut, curled at their feet, they watched the last light of day fold itself gently into tomorrow, knowing that the most extraordinary stories are not the ones that begin with noise, but the ones that choose to continue quietly, honestly, and with heart. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop us a comment below and say hello. It means more than you know. To see this little community grow across cities, states, and oceans. If this story touched your heart, and you'd like to hear more stories of quiet kindness, unexpected love, and second chances, please consider subscribing to the channel. And don't forget to tap the bell so you'll never miss a moment that just might stay with you. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, may you be safe, be well, and believe in the good that still lives in this world.